Between 1986 and 1987, some of America's most damaging Cold War secrets weren't stolen from secure government facilities or passed in shadowy parking garages. They were transferred in food courts and shopping mall dressing rooms, hidden inside folded newspapers and Nordstrom bags, while families ate pizza and teenagers shopped for clothes just feet away. On a Friday evening in late October 1987, David Chen walked through the crowded corridors of White Flint Mall in Bethesda, Maryland. He wore his security guard uniform, a polyester shirt with a bronze badge that gave him just enough authority to blend into the background of suburban commerce. The mall was packed with the usual Friday crowd. Teenagers clustered near the arcade, families queued at the food court, couples browsed store windows. The air smelled of cinnamon rolls and cheap cologne. Chen was 28 years old and carried himself with the careful posture of someone who had learned to be invisible. He had worked mall security for 3 years, earning $18,500 annually, barely enough to cover his mother's kidney dialysis treatments. He walked past the Waldenbooks, past the Radio Shack, past the Gap with its pastel sweaters displayed in the window. His destination was the food court, where the Friday evening dinner rush created exactly the kind of chaos he needed. The food court was a cathedral of American consumption. Orange Julius, Sparrow, hot dog on a stick, a Chinese place called Panda Express. The tables were mostly full, the noise level high enough to make conversation difficult. Chen bought a Coke from McDonald's and found a table near the center of the court. He placed his folded copy of the Washington Post on the table in front of him, sports section visible. He waited. At 7:43, a man in his mid-30s sat down across from him. The man wore a Georgetown University sweatshirt and carried his own newspaper. They did not acknowledge each other. Chen sipped his Coke and watched teenagers argue over pizza slices. The man across from him unfolded his newspaper, scanned the front page. 2 minutes passed. Then the man stood, leaving his newspaper on the table. He walked toward the bathrooms without looking back. Chen waited another 30 seconds. Then he reached across the table, picked up the newspaper the man had left, and folded it together with his own. The exchange took perhaps 5 seconds. He finished his Coke, stood, and walked back through the mall toward the parking lot. The newspaper felt no different than his own. The weight was identical. Nothing about his movements suggested anything other than a security guard finishing his dinner break. In his car, a 1982 Honda Accord, Chen placed both newspapers on the passenger seat. Beneath the sports section of the newspaper he had picked up, folded inside a McDonald's Happy Meal box, were 3 rolls of 35mm film. He started his engine and pulled out of the parking lot, merging into the Friday evening traffic on Rockville Pike. In 18 hours, the film would be sitting in a processing lab in the basement of the Soviet embassy. Chen drove carefully, staying exactly at the speed limit. He had no way of knowing that 26 FBI agents had watched the entire exchange. David Chen had not always been a traitor. 3 years earlier, in 1984, he had been an honorably discharged Army Signals Intelligence analyst, proud of his service, looking forward to a quiet civilian life. He had grown up in Bethesda, the son of Taiwanese immigrants who ran a small dry cleaning business. His father died when Chen was 19. His mother worked 16-hour days to keep the business running while putting David through community college. Chen joined the Army at 21, scored high on aptitude tests, and was assigned to Signals Intelligence. He spent 3 years at Fort Meade, analyzing Soviet communications patterns. He was good at his work, meticulous and patient. When he left the Army in 1982, he expected to transition smoothly into civilian intelligence work. Instead, he found the job market saturated with former military analysts. The applications he submitted went unanswered. He took the mall security job temporarily, just to pay bills while he kept looking. $18,500 a year was barely survival wages in the Washington suburbs, but he told himself it would not be for long. Then, in March 1984, his mother collapsed at work. The diagnosis was kidney failure. She needed dialysis 3 times a week at $240 per session. Insurance covered some costs, but not all. Chen did the math. Even with insurance, the monthly out-of-pocket expenses were $1,100. His take-home pay was barely $1,500. He took out loans. He opened credit cards. By summer, he was $23,000 in debt and sinking deeper every month. That was when he met Viktor Sudoplatov. The meeting occurred at a bar in Bethesda on a Thursday evening in July. Chen was drinking alone, trying to calculate whether he could consolidate his credit card debt. A man in his 50s, gray-haired and well-dressed, sat down next to him. They talked about nothing at first. The weather, the Orioles, the cost of living in the Washington area. Sudoplatov was patient, friendly, genuinely interested. Over 3 meetings spanning 2 weeks, he carefully drew out Chen's story. The military service, the skills in signals intelligence, the financial pressures. On their 4th meeting, at a diner in Silver Spring, Sudoplatov made his proposal. He said he worked as a consultant for various organizations that needed information about government security procedures. Nothing classified, he emphasized. Just general knowledge about how facilities operated, how security personnel were deployed. He could pay well for this kind of consulting. $2,000 for an initial conversation. More for useful information. Chen should have walked away. He knew exactly what was being offered, but he sat there and thought about his mother lying on a dialysis machine, about the bills piling up on his kitchen table. He said yes. Viktor Sudoplatov was not actually a consultant. He was a KGB officer operating under diplomatic cover as a cultural attaché at the Soviet embassy in Washington. He had been recruiting and running intelligence assets in the United States for 7 years. His insight about American shopping malls came from simple observation. He had spent months studying suburban life, understanding how Americans moved through commercial spaces. Shopping malls in the mid-1980s were the central gathering points of American suburbia. White Flint Mall alone received 40,000 visitors every week. Tysons Corner saw closer to 70,000. The malls operated 70 to 80 hours per week, creating constant flow. The architecture was designed for easy navigation, multiple entrances and exits, anchor department stores at each end connected by corridors lined with smaller shops. Security was minimal. A few guards patrolling, cameras in some stores, but rarely in common areas. The assumption was that malls were safe, public, fundamentally innocent spaces. Sudoplatov recognized that this innocence was perfect cover for intelligence operations. A meeting in a park could be observed and noted. A meeting in a restaurant created records, receipts, witnesses who might remember. But a meeting in a mall food court, amid 500 other people eating lunch, was invisible. The transient nature of mall traffic meant no one belonged there, so everyone belonged there. He began developing a network built specifically around mall infrastructure. Not a single asset, but multiple operatives who would never meet directly, connected through a relay system that used the malls themselves as transfer points. Over 18 months, from 1983 to 1985, Sudoplatov recruited 3 primary assets. David Chen was the first, recruited in July 1984. His value was specialized knowledge of signals intelligence and security procedures, combined with financial desperation that made him vulnerable. Patricia Delacroix was the second, recruited in November 1984. She was 31, divorced with 2 children, working as a file clerk at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Her ex-husband had stopped paying child support. She was 3 months behind on rent, facing eviction. Sudoplatov approached her at a department store in Alexandria where she was returning clothes she could not afford to keep. The pitch was identical to the one he had given Chen: consulting work, good pay, nothing too sensitive. She hesitated longer than Chen had, but ultimately the pressure was too great. She said, yes. Marcus Webb was the third, recruited in March 1985. He was 35, a technical writer at the National Security Agency with top-secret clearances and access to documentation on signals intelligence collection methods. Webb's vulnerability was not family pressure, but a gambling addiction. He owed $67,000 to bookmakers in Atlantic City, the kind of debt that came with physical threats. Sudoplatov met him at Laurel Park Racetrack, offered a solution. Enough money to clear the debts and start fresh. Webb took less than 48 hours to decide. In early 1986, Sudoplatov added the crucial 4th member to his network. She was different from the others because she had no security clearance, no access to classified information, and no understanding of what she was actually doing. Jennifer Russo was 24 years old and worked as an assistant manager at Waldenbooks in Tysons Corner. She had dropped out of college after 2 years, moved to Virginia for a relationship that had not worked out, and was now making $19,000 a year selling paperbacks and magazines. She was not political. She was not desperate. She was just broke in the ordinary way that most young people were broke, living paycheck to paycheck in a small apartment in Falls Church. Sudoplatov found her through careful observation. He noticed that her job required her to travel between multiple Waldenbooks locations for inventory transfers and training sessions. She had legitimate reasons to move between malls, carrying shopping bags and packages. He approached her in February 1986 at a coffee shop near Tysons Corner. His pitch was different than the one he had used with the others. He told her he worked for a corporate consulting firm that gathered market research and competitive intelligence. They needed someone to transport research materials between offices, someone whose regular routine would not attract attention. The work was simple. Pick up a package at one location, deliver it to another. Sometimes the packages would be documents, sometimes they would be product samples, sometimes just correspondence. $800 per delivery. Cash. No taxes, no paperwork. Russo asked if it was legal. Sudoplatov smiled and said it was corporate intelligence, a gray area perhaps, but nothing criminal. Companies did this kind of research all the time. She thought about it for 3 days, then called the number he had given her. Her role in the network was pure logistics. She never knew what she was carrying. The packages were always sealed, the contents invisible. On Friday evenings, she would meet David Chen at White Flint Mall food court. They would sit at nearby tables, exchange newspapers. Inside the newspaper Chen gave her would be a package, usually film canisters concealed in consumer product boxes. On Saturday afternoons, she would go to Tysons Corner Nordstrom. In the women's dressing room area, she would enter a stall carrying a Nordstrom shopping bag containing the package. Patricia Delacroix would enter an adjacent stall. They would pass the bag under the partition, a movement that took perhaps 3 seconds. On Sunday mornings, Delacroix would meet Marcus Webb at Montgomery Mall food court. Another magazine exchange, another package transferred. Russo believed she was helping with market research. She had no idea she was a courier in a Soviet intelligence network. Her ignorance was not an accident. Sudoplatov had designed it that way, one more layer of insulation. Between February 1986 and October 1987, the network operated with mechanical precision. Every week, classified documents moved from 3 separate government agencies through a relay system built into the infrastructure of suburban shopping malls. David Chen provided materials related to facility security. As a former signals intelligence analyst, now working mall security, he had maintained contacts with former colleagues. He took occasional contract security work at government buildings. This gave him access to layout diagrams, security protocols, schedules of armed couriers delivering classified materials. He photographed everything with a specialized Minox camera Sudoplatov had provided. The camera was small enough to conceal in his palm, designed specifically for document photography. He would set up documents on his kitchen table at night, photograph them page by page, then return the originals before they were missed. The film went into plastic canisters hidden inside McDonald's Happy Meal boxes or cassette tape cases. On Friday evenings, concealed inside a folded newspaper, the packages moved to Jennifer Russo. Patricia Delacroix provided more substantial intelligence. Her position at the Defense Intelligence Agency gave her access to finished intelligence assessments. She worked in a file room, cataloging and distributing reports to authorized personnel. She had legitimate reasons to handle classified documents. Her job was to log them, copy them for distribution, file them. Over 18 months, she photographed approximately 140 separate documents. Soviet naval capabilities in the Mediterranean, satellite reconnaissance schedules for Eastern European targets, communications intercepts from Warsaw Pact military exercises, organizational charts showing DIA personnel assignments. Every Saturday, the film moved from Russo to Delacroix in a Nordstrom dressing room. Every Sunday, it moved from Delacroix to Marcus Webb in a Montgomery Mall food court. Webb was the crown jewel of the network. His position as a technical writer at the National Security Agency gave him access to documentation that explained how American signals intelligence actually worked. He provided technical manuals on satellite collection methods, encryption key management procedures, details on communication vulnerabilities the NSA had identified in Soviet systems, reports on collection priorities in Central America. In August 1987, Webb delivered what would later be classified as the single most damaging document in the entire operation. It was an NSA planning document outlining signals intelligence collection priorities in Nicaragua. Soviet advisors in Nicaragua used this information to completely restructure their communications security. Months of NSA collection work became worthless overnight. The money flowed back through the same channels. Cash payments delivered to dead drops, picked up by the operatives, spent on dialysis treatments and rent payments and gambling debts. Over 18 months, approximately $340,000 moved from the KGB to 4 Americans who had decided that their financial problems justified betraying their country. None of them thought they would get caught. In February 1987, Rachel Moreau sat in her office at the National Security Agency, reviewing routine security violation reports. She was 29 years old, a counterintelligence analyst who had been with NSA for 4 years. Most security violations were mundane. Someone left a classified document on a printer. Someone accessed a file they were authorized to read but had not properly logged. The vast majority were simple mistakes, quickly resolved. But Moreau had learned to watch for patterns. Individual violations meant nothing. Patterns meant something was wrong. She noticed that Marcus Webb's name appeared 3 times in violation reports over 6 months. Each time he had accessed technical documentation slightly outside his normal work scope. The accesses were legitimate. His clearances allowed it. But the pattern bothered her. Why would a technical writer need satellite collection schedules? His job was documenting systems, not operational planning. She requested Webb's financial records, a routine step in any preliminary security inquiry. What she found made her pause. Webb earned $63,000 a year, a solid salary, but his credit report showed he had paid off $67,000 in debt over the previous 18 months. The payments had come in irregular lump sums, cash deposits that did not correspond to his salary. On March 12th, Moreau opened a formal preliminary inquiry. By April, the FBI was involved. Special Agent Thomas Kovich was 34, a counterintelligence specialist who had worked Soviet cases for 6 years. He read Moreau's report and recognized the indicators immediately. Unexplained cash, access to classified materials, a pattern of unusual document requests. On May 3rd, FBI surveillance teams began following Marcus Webb. The first 3 weeks were frustrating. Webb's routine seemed entirely normal. He went to work, went home to his apartment in Fairfax, occasionally visited racetracks on weekends. He shopped at malls, ate at restaurants, lived an unremarkable suburban life. The surveillance teams documented everything, looking for any contact that might indicate he was meeting a handler. They found nothing obvious. The breakthrough came on May 17th, a Sunday morning. Webb drove to Montgomery Mall, parked, went inside. Surveillance agents followed at a distance, watching him browse through a bookstore, buy coffee at the food court. At 11:20 in the morning, Webb sat at a food court table reading the Washington Post. A woman in her early 30s sat down at an adjacent table. She was reading a magazine. After 3 minutes, Webb stood, leaving his newspaper on the table. The woman remained seated. 30 seconds later, the woman reached over, picked up Webb's newspaper, folded it together with her magazine, and walked away. The contact lasted less than 5 seconds. It could have been meaningless, someone picking up trash from an adjacent table, but the surveillance agent photographed the woman and ran her through databases. Her name was Patricia Delacroix. She worked at the Defense Intelligence Agency. That was when the FBI realized they were not looking at one person. They were looking at a network. The FBI opened a full investigation on Patricia Delacroix on May 21st. They pulled her financial records, employment history, security clearance files. What they found confirmed their suspicions. Delacroix was divorced with 2 children, working as a file clerk at DIA, earning $26,000 annually. 18 months earlier, she had been 3 months behind on rent, her bank account overdrawn, credit cards maxed out. Now her accounts showed regular cash deposits. Over 15 months, approximately $108,000 had moved through her checking account in irregular lump sums. The pattern was identical to Marcus Webb's financial profile. Debt, followed by unexplained cash, followed by comfortable stability. By June, surveillance teams were following both Webb and Delacroix simultaneously. They documented Webb's Sunday morning visits to Montgomery Mall, Delacroix's Saturday afternoon shopping trips to Tysons Corner. On June 14th, a surveillance agent followed Delacroix into Tysons Corner. She entered Nordstrom carrying a shopping bag with the store's logo. The agent watched her walk to the women's clothing section, enter the dressing room area. 7 minutes later, Delacroix exited carrying a different but identical Nordstrom bag. The original bag was gone. The agent tried to follow up, but the dressing room area was crowded. Multiple women had entered and exited. She had lost track of the original bag. 2 weeks later, a different agent was reviewing security camera footage from Tysons Corner, trying to identify who might have picked up Delacroix's bag. The footage was grainy, the angles poor, but she spotted something. A young woman, mid-20s, had entered the dressing room area approximately 2 minutes after Delacroix departed. She exited, carrying a Nordstrom bag that matched the description of the one Delacroix had arrived with. The FBI pulled the woman's image from other camera angles, ran it through facial recognition. Her name was Jennifer Russo. She worked at Waldenbooks in the same mall. Background check showed nothing remarkable. No clearances, no government employment, no apparent connection to intelligence work. She was just a bookstore employee making $19,000 a year. The FBI could not understand why she was part of the network. What role did she play? They added her to the surveillance rotation. On July 10th, they followed her to White Flint Mall on a Friday evening. She sat at the food court, reading a magazine. At 7:45, a man in a security guard uniform sat at a nearby table. He was reading a newspaper. 3 minutes later, the security guard stood and left his newspaper on the table. Russo reached over, took the newspaper, and left the food court. The FBI photographed the security guard, ran his identification. His name was David Chen, former Army Signals Intelligence Analyst, currently working mall security. By late July, the FBI had identified all 4 members of the network: Chen to Russo to Delacroix to Webb, a relay system using shopping mall infrastructure to move intelligence materials. Now they needed to find the handler. Through August and September, the FBI established the most comprehensive surveillance operation in the Washington field office's recent history. 20 agents rotated coverage across 7 shopping malls, working in shifts that covered every hour the malls were open. They installed hidden cameras in food court areas at White Flint, Montgomery, and Tysons Corner. They positioned agents as mall employees working at information desks and pretending to clean tables. They tracked all 4 operatives simultaneously, documenting every movement. The pattern became clear quickly. Every Friday evening, David Chen met Jennifer Russo at White Flint Food Court. Every Saturday afternoon, Russo met Patricia Delacroix at Tysons Corner, Nordstrom. Every Sunday morning, Delacroix met Marcus Webb at Montgomery Mall food court. The timing was precise, the methods consistent. Newspapers, magazines, shopping bags, everything designed to look like ordinary suburban activity. But the FBI still had not identified the handler. Someone was receiving the materials from Webb, someone connected to Soviet intelligence. They needed to find that person to complete the picture. On September 19th, they caught a break. Surveillance teams followed Webb from Montgomery Mall after his Sunday morning meeting with Delacroix. Instead of going home, he drove to Rock Creek Park. He parked near a hiking trail, walked for 15 minutes, then stopped at a specific tree marked with orange paint. Webb knelt down, pretending to tie his shoe. He placed something small behind the tree, covered it with leaves, then stood and walked back to his car. The FBI waited 30 minutes, then sent an agent to check the location. Behind the tree, wrapped in plastic, was the package Webb had received from Delacroix. They left it in place and established observation posts. 6 hours later, a black sedan with diplomatic plates pulled into the parking area. A man in his 50s, well-dressed, got out and walked to the same tree. He retrieved the package, returned to his car, and drove away. The FBI followed the car to the Soviet embassy on Wisconsin Avenue. They ran the plates, identified the vehicle as assigned to the embassy motor pool. Photographic surveillance identified the man as Viktor Sudoplatov, registered as a cultural attaché. Sudoplatov was in FBI counterintelligence databases. He was a known KGB officer who had been operating in Washington for 7 years under diplomatic cover. The network was now fully mapped: Chen to Russo, to Delacroix, to Webb, to Dead Drop to Sudoplatov, to Soviet Embassy to Moscow. By mid-October, the FBI had enough evidence for prosecution. They obtained FISA warrants for electronic surveillance of all 4 operatives. Black bag jobs into their apartments revealed cameras, film, unexplained cash hidden in freezers and closets. The decision was made. They would observe one more transfer cycle, document it completely, then make simultaneous arrests of all 4 operatives. Friday, October 23rd, would be the final operation the network would ever conduct. On the morning of Friday, October 23rd, FBI Special Agent Thomas Kovich sat in a conference room at the Washington field office, briefing 26 agents on the operation that would begin in 8 hours. The plan was unprecedented in its scope. They would arrest all 4 members of the network within a 90-minute window, preventing any of them from warning the others. The coordination required split-second timing across 3 separate locations. White Flint Mall, where David Chen would make his Friday evening transfer to Jennifer Russo. Tysons Corner, where Russo would drive afterward to prepare for her Saturday meeting with Patricia Delacroix. Montgomery Mall, where Marcus Webb lived and would likely be at home. Kovich divided the agents into 3 teams. Team 1 would handle Chen and Russo at White Flint. Team 2 would arrest Delacroix at her apartment in Alexandria. Team 3 would take Webb at his residence in Fairfax. Each arrest needed to happen quickly and quietly. No public confrontations, no dramatic scenes that might alert the others. The timing was critical. Chen's meeting with Russo typically occurred between 7:40 and 8 in the evening. As soon as that transfer was confirmed and photographed, all 3 teams would move simultaneously. By 6 in the evening, agents were in position. 8 agents were inside White Flint Mall, disguised as shoppers, positioned throughout the food court. 4 more sat in unmarked vehicles in the parking lot. Team 2 was parked outside Delacroix's apartment building. Team 3 was positioned near Webb's residence. Everyone waited for Kovich's signal. At 7:38, David Chen entered White Flint Mall in his security uniform. Surveillance cameras tracked him walking through the corridors toward the food court. At 7:41, Jennifer Russo arrived, parking her car in the west lot. She entered the mall carrying her purse, walked directly to the food court. Chen bought a Coke and sat at his usual table. He placed a folded Washington Post in front of him. Russo bought coffee and sat 3 tables away. She was reading a magazine. At 7:43, Chen stood. He left his newspaper on the table and walked toward the bathrooms. 30 seconds later, Russo reached over, took Chen's newspaper, folded it with her magazine, and placed both in her purse. Agent Kovich watched the exchange through live camera feeds in his command vehicle. He picked up his radio and spoke one word: execute. Across 3 locations, FBI agents began moving simultaneously. In the White Flint parking lot, agents approached Chen as he walked to his car. They showed credentials, asked him to step away from the vehicle. Inside the mall, other agents intercepted Russo near the exit. At the Alexandria apartment, agents knocked on Delacroix's door. At the Fairfax residence, agents surrounded Webb's building. It was 7:47 in the evening. Within 15 minutes, the entire network would be in FBI custody. David Chen reached his Honda Accord in the White Flint parking lot at 7:46. He unlocked the driver's side door, placed the newspaper on the passenger seat. Everything felt normal, routine. Then he heard footsteps behind him, fast and purposeful. A woman's voice said his name. He turned and saw 3 people approaching. The woman in front was holding up FBI credentials at eye level, the gold badge catching the parking lot lights. Special Agent Jennifer Caldwell identified herself and asked Chen to step away from the vehicle. Her voice was calm but firm, the tone of someone who expected compliance. Chen's face went completely blank. He stared at the credentials for 3 seconds, processing what was happening. Then his shoulders slumped. He stepped back from the car without saying a word. He knew exactly what this was. He had known, somewhere in the back of his mind, that this moment would eventually come. Agent Caldwell read him his Miranda rights while another agent handcuffed him. A third agent began photographing the interior of his vehicle. Chen did not resist. He did not ask questions. He simply stood there, silent, as they led him to an unmarked sedan. Inside the mall, Jennifer Russo was walking toward the exit when two agents stepped into her path. They showed credentials and asked her to come with them. Russo looked confused, genuinely bewildered. She asked what this was about. The agents did not answer, simply repeated their request. She complied, still asking questions. She was carrying a Waldenbooks shopping bag and her purse with the folded newspaper inside. She had no idea what she was being arrested for. They escorted her through a side exit to avoid creating a scene. Other shoppers barely noticed. At 7:52, Patricia Delacroix answered a knock on her apartment door. She saw 3 people standing in the hallway holding FBI credentials. She did not ask what they wanted. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and said quietly, "I knew this would happen." She had been expecting this moment for months. Every Sunday after meeting Webb, she had driven home, wondering if this would be the day they came for her. She asked if she could call her sister to arrange care for her children. The agents allowed her 1 phone call. Then they placed her in handcuffs and led her to a waiting vehicle. At 7:56, Marcus Webb was sitting in his living room watching television when he heard pounding on his door. He looked through the peephole and saw 4 people in FBI windbreakers. He ran. Webb went out his back door, jumped a fence, tried to cut through a neighboring yard. He made it approximately 20 feet before 2 agents tackled him near a row of trash cans. He fought briefly, then went limp. They handcuffed him on the ground, read him his rights while he was still lying face down in grass. By 8:02, all 4 members of the network were in FBI custody, being transported to the Washington field office in separate vehicles. Viktor Sudoplatov, watching from a distance at Tysons Corner, saw federal vehicles and immediately left the area. He would be declared persona non grata within 5 days. The FBI transported all 4 operatives to separate interrogation rooms at the Washington field office. They were held in isolation, unable to communicate with each other, each alone with the reality of what had just happened. Standard procedure in espionage cases was to let suspects sit for a while before beginning interrogation. The silence, the uncertainty, the knowledge that their lives had just fundamentally changed, this created pressure that often led to cooperation. Marcus Webb broke first. At 2 in the morning on October 24th, after 6 hours of silence, he asked to speak with agents. Special Agent Kovich and another agent entered the interrogation room. Webb said he wanted a deal. He would tell them everything if they would consider reducing his sentence. He was terrified, sweating, desperate to minimize the consequences. Kovich made no promises but said cooperation would be noted. Webb talked for 7 hours straight. He described every document he had photographed, every meeting with Delacroix, every payment he had received. He provided dates, locations, specific details about NSA materials he had compromised. Total amount received over 18 months, $94,000. All of it spent on gambling debts, which were already accumulating again. David Chen remained silent for 31 hours. He refused to speak without an attorney present. When his lawyer arrived, they negotiated terms. Chen would cooperate fully if the FBI guaranteed continued medical care for his mother. Her dialysis treatments had to continue regardless of his incarceration. The FBI agreed. Chen's confession was more technical than Webb's, focused on the security information he had provided. He described facility layouts, guard schedules, courier routes. Total amount received, $73,000. Most of it spent on medical bills. Patricia Delacroix cooperated immediately, but broke down repeatedly during questioning. She cried about her children, asked about their welfare, wanted assurance they were being cared for. Her sister had picked them up from school, the agents told her. They were safe. Delacroix provided extensive detail about DIA materials she had compromised. She helped damage assessment teams understand exactly what had gone to Moscow, which operations had been exposed. Total amount received, $108,000. Jennifer Russo was genuinely shocked to learn she had been part of an espionage network. She had believed she was doing corporate market research, moving business documents between offices. The FBI explained that her ignorance was not a legal defense. She had knowingly transported materials without asking what they were, accepting cash payments for illegal work. She provided information about her meetings with Chen and Delacroix, described the transfer methods, confirmed the timing and locations. Total amount received, $34,000. By October 26th, the FBI had comprehensive confessions from all 4 operatives. They had documented 73 separate transfers over 18 months, approximately 300 classified documents photographed and delivered to Soviet intelligence. The damage assessment was just beginning. In the spring of 1988, all 4 members of the network appeared separately in federal court. The trials were closed to protect classified information. The evidence was overwhelming, the confessions detailed and complete. Marcus Webb pleaded guilty to multiple counts of espionage and conspiracy. His attorney argued for leniency based on his cooperation, but the damage he had caused was too severe. Federal Judge Harold Morrison sentenced Webb to 35 years in federal prison. The judge acknowledged Webb's cooperation, but emphasized that his betrayal of NSA technical secrets had caused extraordinary harm to national security. Webb was transported to Federal Correctional Institution Allenwood in Pennsylvania. He would serve 20 years before release. Patricia Delacroix pleaded guilty to espionage and unauthorized disclosure of classified information. Her attorney presented her financial desperation, her cooperation with investigators, her genuine remorse. Judge Morrison sentenced her to 30 years. Delacroix cried throughout the sentencing hearing, asking repeatedly about her children. She was sent to Federal Prison Camp Alderson in West Virginia, a minimum security facility for female inmates. Her children were raised by her sister in Virginia. David Chen received 28 years, reduced slightly because of his extensive cooperation with damage assessment teams. He was sent to Federal Correctional Institution Cumberland in Maryland. Chen maintained good behavior throughout his incarceration, worked in the prison library, took correspondence courses. He rarely spoke about his case. Jennifer Russo received the shortest sentence, 12 years. The judge accepted that she had genuinely not understood the true nature of what she was transporting, though her willingness to move unknown materials for cash payments indicated culpable negligence. She was sent to Federal Prison Camp Alderson, the same facility where Delacroix was serving her sentence. They never spoke to each other. Viktor Sudoplatov was declared persona non grata on October 28, 1987. He was given 72 hours to leave the United States. He flew back to Moscow on October 31st. According to intelligence reports, he was promoted within the KGB for his successful recruitment and operation of the network. After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Sudoplatov retired. He was last confirmed seen in 2003, living in a Moscow suburb. His current status is unknown. The damage assessment conducted by CIA, NSA, and DIA determined that the network had caused severe harm. 3 intelligence sources in Eastern Europe were arrested based on information the network provided. 2 received long prison sentences. 1 was executed. Multiple NSA collection programs were compromised and had to be completely restructured at a cost of tens of millions of dollars. Soviet countermeasures developed against specific American technical capabilities eliminated years of intelligence work. The case led to enhanced financial monitoring protocols at all agencies handling classified information. Shopping malls were added to counterintelligence training as potential operational environments for hostile intelligence services. The innocent public spaces of American suburban life had proven to be perfect infrastructure for espionage. Marcus Webb was released from federal prison in 2008 after serving 20 years. He was 62 years old, his health deteriorated from decades of incarceration. He moved to a small apartment in Pennsylvania, lived on Social Security and a small pension from his pre-imprisonment work. He took a job at a hardware store, stocking shelves for minimum wage. Webb rarely spoke about his past. When coworkers asked about the gap in his employment history, he said he had been sick. He maintained no contact with the other members of the network. In 2014, Webb suffered a massive heart attack while walking to work. He died in the ambulance before reaching the hospital. He was 62 years old. No family members attended his funeral. Patricia Delacroix was released in 2006 after serving 18 years. She was 54 years old when she walked out of federal prison camp Alderson. Her children were adults by then, raised by her sister. They had visited her occasionally during her incarceration, but the relationship was strained and distant. Delacroix moved to Oregon, as far from Washington as she could manage. She worked as a librarian at a community library, using skills she had developed during her years in prison. She lived quietly, never discussed her past with co-workers or neighbors. She remained in occasional contact with her children, but never tried to explain or justify what she had done. As of 2020, she was 67 years old and still working at the library. David Chen was released in 2009 after serving 21 years. He was 57 years old. His mother had died while he was in prison in 1993. The kidney disease had finally overwhelmed her despite the dialysis treatments that had started everything. Chen moved to California, worked in private security for a corporate office building. He lived alone, maintained no relationships, spoke rarely about anything personal. He sent occasional letters to his sister, but they had little contact. The family he had tried to save through his betrayal was gone. Jennifer Russo was released in 1998 after serving 10 years. She was 34 years old, her 20s consumed by incarceration. She married in 2001, changed her name, moved to an undisclosed location. She requested that no information about her be made public. As of 2020, her location and status were unknown. She had successfully disappeared into American life. The 4 people who had formed the network were scattered, isolated, carrying their histories alone. The malls where they had operated began closing one by one. White Flint Mall, where Chen and Russo had met every Friday, closed in 2015. The building was demolished in 2018. Landmark Mall closed in 2017. Montgomery Mall was renovated and renamed. The physical spaces where espionage had occurred were erased or transformed. Only Tysons Corner remained largely unchanged, still operating, still crowded with shoppers who had no idea what had happened in those corridors 30 years earlier.